Me and my wife Clary had been looking forward to this weekend getaway for months. Life had been stressful, and we needed a break. So when I found an affordable, quaint, rustic cabin listed on Airbnb deep in the woods of Tennessee, it seemed perfect from the photos, as it showed a cozy 2-room log cabin surrounded by nature. We imagined ourselves hiking and reading by the fire and simply relaxing. We left on a Friday afternoon. The drive initially was uneventful as we left the city behind. The scenery became increasingly picturesque. Rolling hills, dense forests, and the occasional quaint farmhouse. Clary and I were in high spirits, chatting excitingly about our plans. After about 3 hours on the road, we turned off the main highway onto a narrower, less maintained road. We were on the right track, but the further we drove, the more primitive the road became. Pavement gave way to gravel, and then finally to an old dirt road. The last 2 miles were rough, the car bouncing over potholes and loose stones. Trees loomed closer, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the fading daylight. The sense of isolation grew with every turn, and I found myself gripping the steel wheel tighter. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Clary asked as her voice was tinged with unease. I glanced at the GPS and said yes. It says we almost there, just a little further. But even as I said it, I felt a creeping sense of discomfort. There was something about this place that felt off. The air seemed heavier, and a strange, pervasive silence enveloped us. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the hum of the car's engine and the crunch of tires on dirt. When we finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly as it had in the pictures. It was quaint and rustic, with a small porch and a stack of firewood neatly arranged by the door. But the feeling of unease didn't dissipate. If anything, it intensified. Clary winced as she stepped out of the car, her hand clutching her stomach. "I don't feel so good," she muttered. I said maybe it's just a car ride. I suggested, though I wasn't convinced. Clary rarely got car sick. She nodded, but her face was pale, and she moved sluggishly. The air was thick and oppressive, carrying a strange musty odor that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to exhaustion in the unfamiliar surroundings. Inside the cabin was cozy, but the atmosphere was stifling. Clary sank onto the couch. Her breathing was shallow. I said, "Are you okay, sweetie?" I asked, sitting beside her and placing a hand on her forehead. She felt calmly. "I just need to rest for a bit." That's what she said, closing her eyes and saying, "Maybe I'll feel better after a nap." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. I busied myself with unpacking and exploring the cabin, hoping to distract myself. But every corner I turned seemed to hold shadows that were just a bit too dark, and the silence was unnerving. An hour later, Clary was no better. In fact, she seemed worse. Her skin had taken on a sickly hue, and she complained of a pounding headache. I felt gnawing worry in my gut. "Maybe you should leave," I suggested, reluctant to abandon our plans, but more concerned for Clary's health. She nodded weakly, not arguing, saying, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." So we packed everything up quickly, as both of us were eager to get ourselves out of there. And as soon as we stepped outside, I noticed a slight improvement in Claire's condition. She still looked pale, but seemed more alert. We loaded the car in record time and set off down the dirt road. The further we drove, the better Clary looked. The oppressive feeling began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief. By the time we reached the gravel road, she was almost back to normal. And when we hit the pavement, she looked completely fine. Then, in a trembling voice, Clary asked me, "What do you think now?" I said, "I don't know," I admitted. "But there is something not right about that cabin." Then after that, we started driving in silence for a while, as both of us were lost in our thoughts. The sense of unease had been so strong, so tangible, I couldn't explain it. But I know one thing for sure: we couldn't be going back. When we finally rejoined the highway, the last traces of discomfort vanished. It was as if we had crossed an invisible boundary, leaving the malevolent presence behind. Claire's color returned, and she even managed a small smile. "I feel so much better now." And then both of us sat in disbelief. And as I'm replying back to her, the memory of the cabin still lingered at the back of my mind. We decided to drive straight home, abandoning any plans of finding another place to stay. The thought of spending another night in the woods was unbearable. We stopped at a dinner along the way, grateful for the warmth and the presence of other people. The cheerful chatter and clinking of cutlery were a welcome contrast to the eerie silence of the cabin. Then over some burgers and fries, we talked about what had happened. Claire described the intense nausea and the overwhelming sense of dread that had gripped her as soon as we arrived. I shared my own feelings of unease and the strange, heavy atmosphere that seemed to permeate the place. It was like the air was thick with something, I said, struggling to find the words. Something really, really bad, And as I'm gazing upon all of this, I asked Clary, "Do you think it was haunted?" Immediately her eyes got wide open and she shrugged, saying, "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe it was just, I don't know, something in the environment, mold, or some kind of gas maybe." Even after what she said, we were not convinced still. But we just sat there and finished our meal, in silence, as both of us were lost in thoughts. As we got back on the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. But what exactly? I had no idea. A few days after we returned home, I decided to leave a review on the Airbnb listing. I felt it was only fair to warn others about our experience. But when I pulled up the listing, it was gone. The cabin had been removed from the site. Curiosity piqued. I did some digging and I found a local news article about the area mentioned in the cabin. It had been built in the 1920s by a family who had mysteriously vanished a few years later. Over the decades, the property had changed hands numerous times, with each owner reporting strange occurrences, sudden illnesses, bizarre noises, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Most had abandoned the place within months. Reading this sent a chill down my spine. It seemed like we weren't the only ones who had filled the cabin's malevolent presence. I shared the article with Clary, and we both agreed to put the experience behind us. There was no rational explanation, but we know one thing for certain. Something was very wrong with that cabin in the woods. And that was the end of today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, smash me the damn thumbs up button right now. Thank you.